Good morning. It is Saturday, 31st of October, and it's midday. My name is Aaron Hunt, and welcome to the 1000 subscriber special. Thank you all of you who have subscribed, and let us know that you're finding some value in these videos. As always, this is not taken as legal advice. It is merely a commentary on what's happening with immigration in New Zealand. Now, a lot is happening in New Zealand. We had an election a few weeks ago where Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party became the first party in several decades that is able to govern the country on its own. Our PM has been praised worldwide for our government's response to COVID-19, leading to an actual drop in the number of deaths in June and July to be 13% less than last year, and the number of Kiwis with flu dropping by 99%. COVID-19 deaths in New Zealand are just 5 per million people compared to 685 per million in the USA, and with fewer active COVID-19 cases in the community in New Zealand than there is active cases in the White House. And of course there's another election coming soon up with just a few days time of the US elections, where Trump is being challenged by Joe Biden. And just in case the worst should happen, we wanted to give a video to all of you in the USA with advice on how to move to New Zealand. Of course this can apply to any other country, but we feel that those of you from the USA may be wanting some advice right about now. Now, we've seen some reports in the US news recently, if you want to call Fox News news, that New Zealand is a tyrannical place with a socialist government taking away our civil liberties. So we thought we would film today from Mission Bay, one of the beaches closest to central Auckland, our largest city of 1.5 million people, to show you what things really look like. With a country larger than the United Kingdom, filled with forests, mountains, lakes and beaches like this, and even close to a large major city, we can assure you that things are pretty good here in New Zealand. And for sport lovers, we had 50,000 people in a stadium last week to watch the All Blacks beat Australia, something that many countries just can't allow right now. Then we're going to break up this into two sections. So one for the options that are available during COVID-19, and the other for options that may be there once New Zealand opens its borders after COVID-19. Of course, immigration in New Zealand is changing rapidly. So those post-COVID-19 options may change as well, but we'll do future videos on those changes as they happen. We're going to cover these options pretty quickly. There are a number of things to go through. We're not going to do any of the visas in a lot of detail because it'd be a very long video if we did. We're also going to cover the ones that are more common. There are other visa types that we're not going to cover, such as diplomatic visas or refugee visas. We're going to focus on those that are more likely to be of use to people in the USA. So let's get started with how you can move to New Zealand from the USA during COVID-19. Now, with the border closed, this requires a border exception for people coming to New Zealand, as well as pre-registering for managed isolation, something that we call MIQ. So the options here are all about who can get a border exception. One thing you should note is that New Zealand has two larger categories of visas. You have temporary entry visas, and then you have residence visas. Now, temporary entry visas are ones that allow you to be in New Zealand for a set period of time and may allow one or multiple entries into the country, though with COVID-19 typically those visas are only single entry. Residence visas allow the person to remain in New Zealand indefinitely, but may have restrictions on when someone can enter. So the first residence visa people get often allows them to enter New Zealand for only several years, after which a further residence visa or a permanent residence visa, which allows entry forever, needs to be applied for. Now, for all the visas we're going to mention here, there are a number of other requirements. We're not going to go through them in detail, but they will include things like health, character, English levels, a requirement for some of the visas, as well as suitable evidence as to funds you're bringing in if that's a requirement, or also for a relationship if that's the visa you're going for. We're going to be giving you a very broad overview. Please contact us if you want any more detail on any of these visas in particular. Now, the first border exception that opened up during the pandemic was for critical health workers. These are still available and apply to a number of staff who work in the health sector. There's a list of people who can apply for these, and it's reasonably broad. It includes the more expected sort of categories like doctors and nurses, as well as technical support staff. It also extends to people who install, operate and maintain medical equipment, some of those who are offering aged care or disability support staff. You are required to have a job offer in that job to be able to apply for that visa and to get that visa, so that you're coming to New Zealand to undertake that role. Now there is an allowance for foreign trained nurses who have applied to do the Competence Assessment Program, or CAP, in New Zealand, so they can transfer their nursing skills across to New Zealand. It doesn't require you to have a job offer, it does require you to be enrolled in a CAP course that starts before 31st December 2020. But we do expect that requirement of that date to be extended further into next year, later this year, as there's always a need for nurses in the country. Of course, there are demands in other areas outside of health, and for that reason we have an allowance for other critical workers. Now these fall into two categories. There are those who need to be in New Zealand for less than 6 months, and those who need to be in New Zealand for more than 6 months. So for those for under 6 months, it needs to be shown that there is either a unique experience or technical skills that are not readily obtainable in New Zealand, or they are undertaking a time-critical role with a project that is approved by the government to a government-to-government agency, or it brings significant benefit to the economy, or it's on a list of government-approved projects or events that the government has provided. Now this list includes a number of projects such as building certain hospitals, building important highways, motorways, and events like the Cricket World Cup or the America's Cup. Now, to go for more than 6 months, then the role must be essential for the delivery of a government-approved event or project, which we mentioned before, be essential for the completion of a government-funded science program, with government support for that visa exception, or that the role in New Zealand must be paying at least 106,000 New Zealand dollars, which is about 70,000 USD, and that's per year. So that is the other critical workers. Now the final option during COVID, or the final main option during COVID, which we're going to cover, is those who are lucky enough to be in a relationship with a New Zealand citizen or resident. Now whether your partner is with you in the USA or whether they're in New Zealand, you can apply for a border exception and a visa to travel to New Zealand to be with them. You'll need to show evidence that you have previously lived together or you are currently living together, as that is the mechanism that Immigration New Zealand uses to judge a relationship, that you have lived together in a genuine and stable relationship. And then once you're in New Zealand, you're able to apply for a work visa under partnership and then a residence visa under partnership. Now there are other exceptions, and then on rare occasions Immigration New Zealand can grant visas under those other exceptions. However, these are very rare and really require a unique situation. If you don't fit into any of the categories covered, but you believe you need to be in New Zealand, then get in contact with us and we can review your situation and give you our advice. Now that of course is, need to be in New Zealand, not want to be in New Zealand, as I'm sure you'll want to be in New Zealand, but Immigration New Zealand is currently only looking for those who actually need to be here and can show a strong and justified need and a benefit to New Zealand from them being here. Now the process for all of these is practically the same. There is 2 online forms that get filled out, one by the employer if you're an other critical worker, and then one by the applicant for all the other kinds, so if you're a health care worker or a partnership or others. Now that again needs reviewed by staff Immigration New Zealand and can quickly, and there's 2 levels to that degree. So there's to that review. The first level is a larger team who work through them very quickly and can quickly decline if it's quite clearly not within any of those allowances. After it goes to a more specialised, smaller team who can actually grant that right to that first approval. Now, if you get declined, don't despair, you are allowed to apply again. However, making the same application again and again may not get a different result. With the correct advice and for what you need to put in there, you may be able to turn that no into a yes. Now once you have that approval, you can move to the second stage. The first stage is basically asking for the right to apply for a visa. Now you can actually apply for the visa. What needs to be provided will depend on the type of visa you're applying for, but you'll need at least a digital passport photograph, because it's a scan of your passport, a sponsor in New Zealand who will guarantee to cover your costs of being here, or the ability to show that you have funds to cover your costs of coming here and being here. If you're coming for work, then a signed employment agreement. If you're coming to do the nursing CAP, then proof of your CAP enrolment for your start date. If of course, intimacy relationship if you're coming for love. Now the total processing time for the 2 stages can vary, but it could be as fast as a couple of weeks, or it could take a couple of months. Now, once this is granted, you'll be able to book your MIQ, your isolation, and book your flights to arrive on the same day as your MIQ. Now, you need to arrive in New Zealand within 6 months of the visa being granted, or perhaps a different date if your visa states a different date. Now from 3 November, an important date for you guys, you will not be able to board a flight to New Zealand without having MIQ booked. So remember to do that, and with everyone of course wanting to be here, it's best to get MIQ booked as soon as you can, just as long as you can get a flight that lands on the same day. And remember of course that the time and date change between New Zealand and the US. New Zealand is 23 hours ahead of Hawaii Aleutian Standard Time, through to 17 hours ahead of Eastern Daylight Time, so make sure you get your dates right. Now, of course, at some point the border will reopen, we'll get past COVID-19 and things will be a bit more rosy again, and Americans can enjoy visa-free travel to New Zealand, a place that we call Godzone. Now, you'll be able to travel here for 3 months at a time on the visa-free travel, but because you're likely to want to stay, we're going to give you a few options of how to do that. Now, one of the first questions we'll ask new clients is about their relationship status, as gaining a visa through partnership is the easiest way to remain in New Zealand. Now, most partners of work visa holders can get a work visa, and the children can get student visas, with those visas lasting the same length as the work visa holder's visa length. Now, for partners of New Zealand citizens and residents, they can get a work visa and their children can get student visas for 1 or 2 years, depending on how long they've lived together. And if they've lived together for at least the previous 12 months, they can also apply for a resident visa, and that visa takes about about a year to process. For many of the first steps in New Zealand is going to be as a student. Now, we have a large collection of tertiary education providers across the country, including my alma mater, the University of Auckland, which is ranked 81st university in the world and the 44th best law school. Now, New Zealand provides student visas for study for people of any age, from primary students to PhDs, and we've seen student visas for people who are 5 years old through to the 70s and 80s years of age. And one advantage to a student visa is for those that are studying tertiary qualifications may be eligible for a work visa once they've finished their studies. With those doing a bachelor degree or higher, what we call bachelor degree level 7 or level 8 through 10, eligible for a 3-year open work visa at the end of their study. Now, of course, during that time, while you're doing that 3-year work visa, you could look at possibly applying for a skilled migrant visa, which we'll come to in a moment. If you are between 18 and 30 and you didn't want to study, or you'd already have studies, you can apply for a working holiday visa. Now, this allows you to be in New Zealand for 12 months, where you can work for that entire 12-month period. You can study or train for up to 6 months of that period. Now, in New Zealand, as Kiwis, call that an OE, an overseas experience. For many who take their OEs into New Zealand, we do find that they sort of become a permanent move because they come here and they want to stay here, and they'll then go look for other visas to remain. And one of the big ways to do that, whether you're coming off a working holiday visa or finishing your post-study open work visa, is to look for a temporary work visa, and for most that is the essential skills work visa. For jobs that are paying at or above the median wage, this allows for a 3-year work visa for that employer who you apply for the visa through. Other options are a long-term skill shortage visa, which removes the need for the employer to show there is no Kiwis available to fill that role, or a work to residence visa, which requires a higher salary, but in exchange gives you a pathway to residence, which we'll come to in a second, but it's only available from certain employers that we call accredited employers. So the median salary in New Zealand currently is $25.50 per hour New Zealand dollars. That's about $17 USD. But we expect this to rise in the next few weeks to 27 New Zealand dollars, about 18 USD, in a yearly review that occurs each November. Now, skilled migrant residence visa is one of the main ways that workers will get residence in New Zealand and remain in New Zealand for the rest of their lives. It's a point-based system, meaning that Immigration New Zealand will allocate points based on qualification, age, work experience, and even grant bonus points to people who have jobs outside of Auckland, which is of course our largest city. The first stage of the process requires people to make an expression of interest by filling out an application online, and it goes into a pool for a bi-weekly draw, and those being over the current 160 point requirement being drawn out bi-weekly and invited to apply for the actual visa. And this is currently taking about 2 years to go through the whole process from draw to the visa being granted, unless you're earning more than 106,000 New Zealand dollars per year, which is about 70,000 USD, at which point it can be done in about 6 months. Now, your partner and children will be included in that visa, and they'll also gain residency with you. And the draws are currently paused during COVID-19 until at least April 2021 at the earliest, but they should restart by the time that the border does open. Now, if your employer was on that list of accredited employers that you can gain a work to residence visa from, then you can gain residence from work visa, which is residence which you apply for after 2 years of working in that role. Similar to skilled migrants, can take about 2 years to process, so it is taking a while to process, unless again you're earning over that 70,000 USD threshold, in which case it's taking about a month or two after you hit that 2 year of the working point. And again, of course, your partner and your children can be included in that visa. Now, for those of you who want to come to New Zealand as investors, you don't want to be tied into a job, you want to come here and invest in our country and companies here and bonds here, there is two classes of investment visa. Both require you to invest money in New Zealand to hold that investment for several years. Now, the first is investor class 1, where you can invest $10 million in New Zealand. That's about 6.6 million USD. For 3 years in New Zealand. Now, you gain residence visa once that investment is made, not at the end. So you get residence very, very on in the process. And over that 3 year period, you have to keep that investment in place. You can change the investment, so you can sell shares here and buy shares there, as long as generally the funds are kept in investment in a 3 year period. At the end of the 3 year period, as long as you've been in the country for it's about 40 days per month for each of those 3 years, depending on what type of investments you have, you will then gain a permanent residence visa and the right to remain here forever. And of course, your partner and children will also be included in that visa, and there's no age limit on the main applicant. That's an important difference between investor 1 and investor 2. It doesn't mean, though, of course, that you can have a business overseas and just be here for, Christmas holidays, summer holidays, spend a few weeks here and there, and still be able to get residence in New Zealand, and your family can be here in this beautiful, safe country. Now, if you wanted to invest just 3 million New Zealand, that's just under 2 million USD, there is the investor class 2 visa, which requires an investment to be maintained for at least for a 4 year period. Now, if it includes enough active investments, so investments in New Zealand companies and not just bonds, then you need to be in New Zealand for 438 days over that 4 year period to become a permanent resident. Now, the Investor 2 visa has an age limit of 65 for the main applicant, so it's different between that and the Investor 1. It allows someone to be in New Zealand for just a third of their time, so you still be overseas for most of your time. You do need to show some sort of background in business as well for that one, but you can still become a resident relatively quickly, because residence is given once the investment is made, and then becomes permanent once you get that 3 year period had you met all those conditions. Now, for both visa types, you need to show how the funds were earned and how the funds were transferred into New Zealand, showing the chain of custody of the funds from the US bank or the bank in the world the funds are stored in through to New Zealand. Now, and then the next one, if you're looking to invest a little bit less, but you want to sort of start a new business or invigorate a current business, then the entrepreneur visa could be your best option. It has several stages. First, you put in a proposal covering items such as type of business, location, export potential, how much you're going to invest, and the number of full-time jobs you're going to create. Each of these gets a point of value. If you hit 120 points and you show some history of business yourself, whether it's senior management or owning your own business, then you can get through the second phase. You also get, out of 120 points, you can get a 40-point bonus just from being outside of Auckland. Now, there is a big push for people to starting companies outside of our biggest city, get people out of the north down to more of the regional areas, so that straight away 130 points just for not being here. Now, once you've got the approval for the proposal, you can move through to the second stage. And the second stage gives you a visa to be here and allows you to start your business up and to start running it. Now, as before, the source and handling of any investment funds needs to be shown. Needs to be at least 100,000 New Zealand dollars invested, but there's bonus points for investing more. It's about 66,000 USD, and that must be clearly shown. The investments must be used in the business. They can't just be sitting in a bank account. And after 2 years, Immigration New Zealand will review how your business is going and to see whether you've hit all those targets you set for yourself in your original proposal. If you've missed any of those targets within some allowances, then your application is likely to fail. If you achieve them, then you're likely to then go on and get residence from that, and of course you'll have a business here in this beautiful country. Now, the entrepreneur visa is one of the visas with the highest decline rate. and is therefore one of the visa types that we strongly recommend that you get legal advice if you're going to go and make that application, because you could be several $100,000 of investment years into it and then get declined. So make sure that you do it right from the very beginning. And the final category we're going to look at actually is in relation to citizens and permanent residents who want to bring in their parents or perhaps their grandparents or their guardians to live in New Zealand. Now the first one is the parent residence visa. Now this was actually due to restart earlier this year after a several year hiatus of not being available, but it's been delayed due to the pandemic. But we have several clients who are eager for this visa to start up again. It's based on the income of the resident or citizen and their partner, and then both for the last couple of years as well as going forward. Now a solo person with an income of 106,000 New Zealand dollars or about 70,000 USD can sponsor one parent, two parents at about 159,000 or 105,000 USD income. Now with the partner included, you add another 59,000 or New Zealand or 35,000 USD about to each of those figures, and the same again for each additional parent you want to add on. So for a couple to bring in all four parents, the combined income needs to be about 318,000 New Zealand dollars or 212,000 USD, which is high for most people, but for some of you that may be a possible option. The second option is the parent retirement residence visa, which is based on the income of the parent. Now the parent will need to have an annual income of at least 60,000 New Zealand dollars, about 40,000 USD, and will need to invest $1 million New Zealand dollars, 667,000 USD in New Zealand, and hold another $500,000 to live off. Now they would get a residence visa once the funds are shown and the investment is made, and then after 4 years of maintaining that investment, that residence visa will become a permanent residence visa. And that covers the most common visa types that for Americans coming to New Zealand. As stated, this was a very quick overview, and each visa has a lot more of nuanced requirements and ways of handling it correctly. If you want any more questions and help with an application, please get in contact with us. Until then, we sort of say kia kaha, stay safe, and all the best for November 3rd and the weeks that are going to follow. And we hope to see you here soon in Godzone, New Zealand.